everyone, it's Amy here and I'm so excited to have you back for week 2 of our video series to help you get back to school ready. I hope you enjoyed all of last week's videos. I hope you're feeling a little bit more prepared for school already and have maybe started actioning some of the things we have spoken about. So today we are talking about everything behaviour management, because if you were anything like me when you were at uni, you didn't learn anything about practical behaviour management. Sure, we learned about theorists like Skinner and Maslow, and that's all great to start, developing your theory and how you're going to teach within the classroom, but it doesn't actually have much practical application when you're sitting in the classroom or standing in the classroom. Who sits? Standing in the classroom and Joe Bloggs is starting to act up. The first thing that I want to talk about is whole school behaviour management approaches or policies. So check with your school and find out if there's anything that you need to know in regards to behaviour management and how the school deals with it. For example, when I started at my most recent school, which was like 7 or 8 years ago now, they were 1, 2, 3 magic, and so I was thrown in the deep end and told I had to do 1, 2, 3 magic, but they didn't do any training with me and didn't give me any resources. They just expected me to know everything, which was fun. So make sure you ask as many questions as you need if you do need to implement a new behaviour management system in your classroom. Also check out if your school has any whole school reward systems, or if your school is PBS or PBIS, then they probably have a matrix of expectations within the school that you have to align to. So check with your admin, ask first. Once you've done that, we're talking about inside our own classrooms now, where you probably have a lot more freedom in how you manage things. First step. You need to have clear expectations with your students. They need to be clear of what those expectations are, and you need to do them consistently. So how you manage them and what you expect from your students needs to be consistent. So the first thing I like to do, one of the very first things on the very first day of school, is I set up my classroom rules, and I do that with my students. So we sit down and we talk about the type of classroom that we want and how we're going to achieve that. So what rules do we need? How do we need to work within this classroom to make sure it works efficiently and everybody feels safe and comfortable? So we kind of do a brainstorm up on the board. We start to collect ideas together, and then we start to actually frame them into the rules. And what you want to do is you want to frame all rules in the positive, not the negative. There has been tons of research done on this to show that it has more positive impact if students are thinking about what they should be doing, not thinking about what they shouldn't be doing. So for example, you might have something like you don't want them to call out. So the rule that you would write down is put your hand up when you wish to speak. Having the rules consistent like that and in the positive frame allows you to remind students what you want to do. It allows you to keep a good atmosphere in the classroom without dragging it down all the time with don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. I find that generally year after year the rules are pretty much the same thing. So you have one about listening actively, putting your hand up when you wish to speak. You usually have one about being kind to each other. It just, often you've got the same sort of rules that pop up year after year. And again, it will depend on what your school has. So my school has gone PBS in the last 3 years, so we have developed a behaviour matrix. So I make sure that my rules tie in with them. So I would look at the behaviour matrix, which has our values along the top, and then under that it tells what each of those are. So we have one that is responsibility, and underneath that it's listen actively, or I think that might be under respect. I forget right now, I'm on holiday mode, forgive me. But basically we take that listen actively and we would say, well, that's what I expect of you in the classroom as well. When I first started teaching, I had these an A2 poster made up that I laminated and actually wrote the rules on in whiteboard marker, which allowed me for the first couple of years of my teacher training to change them out every year and make them specific with the kids so they could see me building them with them. A few years after that, I realized they were pretty much the same thing each year anyway, and we always came up with pretty much the same wording. So I did just make some A3 posters with the sentence written out on each one, and I would put them up in my room so they were clearly displayed. Now that we've got the behaviour matrix, we kind of just refer to that, and I don't have my own rules set up in the classroom. Something else I love to do to really get the students involved in it is have them sign a piece of paper to say that they've seen those rules, they've helped design those rules, and that they're going to follow them. It just brings more accountability into it. So when I had my A3 posters up, one of those A3 posters was just a poster with all their signatures on it, laminated. The next thing I want to talk about is that Behaviour management mainly is about preventing misbehaviour. So rather than trying to deal with misbehaviour, let's prevent it from ever happening. And there's a couple of key ways you can do that. And the first one is building positive relationships with your students. You want them to like you, you want them to respect you, and you want them to look up to you. So you do that by interacting with them, welcoming them into the classroom each day, showing them that you value them and their opinion and what they have to say, listening when they're speaking to you, and talking back to them about things that interest them. So maybe one day you had a talk with a child about how much they love Pokemon. So maybe the next day you go up to them and say something that you went home and researched about Pokemon, or your favorite Pokemon, or did you see this episode about this? Just something that shows them that, hey, you said something to me the other day, I remembered it, and now I'm interacting with you again about that same topic. So you've probably heard the saying before that you want to be friendly with your students but not their friends. And I definitely think that that involves sharing both ways. You want to find out information about them, but you also want to tell them information about you. So on the first day of school, I actually start off with a little about me PowerPoint that shows them pictures of my family. It tells them where I grew up and where I've come from and some of my favorite things, like I love purple. So get to know your students, build up that rapport with them. A smile goes a really, really long way. Sometimes that's the only smile that a kid sees every day. So just give them that smile in the morning that says, I love having you here. I am so happy to have you in my classroom. Once you've got that relationship with them, misbehaviour is going to happen far less because they're going to want to be good for you. They're going to want to show you their best behaviour. And that makes the next thing even more valuable, which is rewards that you can give students for good behaviour, which should always start off with praise. So you may have heard about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation when kids are doing things. Intrinsic means they want to do it. There's something coming from being inside that maybe says, I want to learn about this topic, or I want to do well on this to make my mum proud, or I want to do well on this because I want to do better than I did last time. Extrinsic is when there's an external motivation, like mum's going to give me $50 if I get an A in this subject, or if I work well, the teacher's going to give me this. Intrinsic is obviously more valuable than extrinsic, but I still don't see any problem with having them both in the classroom. But the thing about praise and using praise as a motivation is that it is far more valuable when it is coming from somebody that you respect or you admire or you care about. So if your students have a good relationship with you, you telling them, oh, I love how you worked today, I love how you did that, or thank you so much for lining up quietly, is going to mean a lot more than if they don't like you, they have no respect for you, they're not going to care whether you're happy with their work or not. So make that connection to them, which then makes praise more valuable. So as I said before, I am not against having reward systems in my class and giving students physical things to thank them for their good behaviour. I think looking back on my primary school years, I remember a lot of the reward systems that my teachers had and how I would work hard for those things. And yes, I'm still intrinsically motivated to do a lot of things. It didn't ruin me for the rest of my life. And some kids are just going to naturally respond better to extrinsic motivation until you can train them up to greater value intrinsic motivation. So I want to take you through my reward systems that I use because I actually change them up every term. And that keeps it interesting for the children and it keeps it interesting for me because by the end of each term, I'm not giving out rewards as often. One, because they're behaving really well, so I don't have to be zip, 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 zip all the time with the rewards. But secondly, because I get a little bit bored of it, I get a little bit tired of it, my excitement's drained a little bit. So doing something different every term can be really, really great. And I also have a slightly different focus with my rewards each term, which I'll explain as I go through. So in term 1, I use a jelly bean jar, and no, this is not real jelly beans, it's just called a jelly bean jar. I got this strategy from the Behaviour Centre in my capital city when they worked with me in my first year of teaching because I had a difficult student in my classroom who had already been identified. So that teacher had used, the first teacher that had this student had used this approach, so I needed to continue it on for consistency with this student. What happens is it's a two-part system. One is that the kids are individually earning things and points, but then they all contribute to a whole class point system which aligns to goals that they have set. So students all have a little piece of paper on their desk that has a 5x3 grid on it. And when students do good things, you can give them a stamp. Now, I think originally I was meant to actually go around and give each student a stamp when I was giving them a reward, but what I found was that I gave out less because I had to go and get the stamp, because I had to stamp their little chart. So in the end, I developed a trust system with them where I said, you are going to draw a little picture on when I give you a stamp. I'm trusting that you'll only do it when I allow you to, and if you lose my trust, then you'll start again with a new reward sheet and I will have to come up and stamp them. So once they get one row filled out, which was 5 little stamps, they would get a jelly bean, which was just a laminated jelly bean looking piece of card, to go and put on our cardboard jelly bean jar that was up on a wall. And they would start at the bottom and work their way up. It just had Velcro on the back, so they knew exactly where they needed to stick it. And at certain levels of the jelly bean jar, we as a class had decided on class rewards. So the first one's something little like 5 minutes playtime or maybe a certain game, and it builds up to a bigger one at the top. Usually there was 4 rewards levels. The top one was something big like a whole class party or a movie. And generally speaking, you would get to the first level on that, or try to ping enough students for good behaviour that you would get to the first level within the first week. And then you probably wouldn't get to the top of the jar till right at the end of the term. So it kind of becomes harder to get there, and there was more jelly beans in each cluster to make it a little bit harder, and they work a little bit longer to get there. Going back to their little sheet that they had on their desk though, they would get the jelly bean for each row, but when they got a whole sheet filled out, which was 15 stamps, they would get a reward from my prize box. Now, my prize box is just a 3-drawer system that I have set up. At the beginning of the year, I spent $50 on eBay looking for cheap bulk buy toys. You just type into the search bar bulk buy toys and look for the lower priced ones. I usually don't spend more than $1 per student per prize. So we're looking at things like there was slap bracelets or pencils, pens, erasers, necklaces, bracelets, toy cars, marbles, things like that. And so I'd fill that up with $50 worth, and then that would be used for the year. So once the prize box was empty of physical, tangible little toys, that was it. I wouldn't stock it again. And then I also had things that were no cost rewards. So things like they could pick a little card up that would say they could have a special chair on a day a week. So I had 2 wheelchairs in my class, so they could have one of them. There was another one that was use the teacher desk for a day. There was another one that was get out a spelling for the day. Just different rewards that didn't cost me anything. So they were working on the individual goals. They were always happy when they got their whole thing filled out. But then we also had the whole class one, which meant that we built up this camaraderie of everybody working together and everybody celebrating when everybody else was getting jelly beans or rewards on their stamp chart. Then in term 2, I do just a simple old school group point system. So I set all my tables up in groups. The kids get together, they pick a name for their group so that they feel like they belong, they feel like they're, they get that camaraderie, and they would just put points up on the board in a tally system, so they were learning maths at the same time. And then for younger kids, it was every week. For older kids, I do every 2 weeks, but they get a prize if they are the top group. Then in term 3, I swapped to a kind of what I call a reward chart. I used to call it snakes and ladders, but basically what happens is there's a 100 chart up on the wall. It's got ladders on it, but not the snakes. And the kids have a little name. For younger kids, a little tag with their name on it that's blue tacked up there. For older kids, I got them to use a whiteboard marker and write their initials up. So they would start on 1 and they would roll the dice every time they were identified as doing something good, and they would move that many. So if they rolled the dice and got a 5, they would move 5. If they landed on a ladder, they got to go up the ladder, and every time they got up to 100, they would get to go into my reward box, which, as I said, already had some stuff in it that I've set up. By that stage though, most of the things are tangible. There's not as many rewards in there anymore. And what I found was by term 3, you're not giving out rewards as often with the frequency that you were in term 1 when you were training the kids. By now, they've kind of got most things locked into place, so it's really special things that they're getting. So by having them go up and roll a dice, it's not a big interruption to your lesson all the time because not as many kids are getting it. And then there's this whole, they get to roll the dice and move their name across. Like there's more to it that they get excited about. And they also get excited about the race up to the top, who's going to get there first. And it's not necessarily the child who gets to go and roll the dice the most often, because of the ladders that change things up and what number do you actually get on the dice. So my kids really love that one. I really enjoyed using that one for the last few years. Then in term 4, it's definitely my favorite one. I save this for the end of the year for a couple of reasons, but it is class money. So what I get the students to do is they design different notes. We do a $1, $2, $5, and $10 note, and they design some of those looks. We then vote on which ones we want for each dollar, for each note, and I do them back and front, so there's 8 possible kids that get selected. Once you got selected for one, you're out of the running for any of the others, and then I go and photocopy a whole bunch of those off and cut them all up, and then I start giving out money for various things. And then students can buy things. They can buy a trip into the reward box, they could buy the special chair, they could buy sitting at the teacher's desk. I also bring in one called Winter Warmer or Hula Cooler, depending on the term, which is where they get to stay in at lunchtime with me in the classroom. So Winter Warmer is during winter when I've got the heater on, and Hula Cooler was named by one of my kids last year, and it is in summer where they get to come in when the aircon's on, and they get to invite a friend with them, and they just spend whatever they want to do in the classroom having a little bit of free time. So they are my reward systems, and it's really important to find ones that work for you, work for your style of teaching, that aren't going to be too much of an interruption to your lesson. And you definitely want to, in term 1, especially in the first week, ping as many kids for doing the right thing as you can. As soon as you've set up your rules, as soon as you know what your rules are, you want to start rewarding kids. You want to start praising them, like, thank you for doing that, thank you for doing this rule, thank you, and use the wording from the rules as well. That's really important. If we can try and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat the rules, they get stuck in their kids' head better, and they're more likely to do them. So I've talked about how we want to be consistent with our expectations. We also want to be consistent with how we deal with bad behavior or when the kids start getting off track. So I was really lucky. In my 3rd year of uni, I was with a mentor teacher who had just done CMS training. Now, I'm not sure if that was just in WA or whether that was a whole Australia thing. It stood for Classroom Management Strategies, and it was a system that had been developed, and it was being taught throughout all of WA at least. Like I said, I don't know about the other states, and this teacher had recently been to the training, so she passed a lot of that information on to me, and it was just so valuable, opened my eyes up to so many things. And then in my 4th year, when I was on my ATP, I actually got one of the trainers of CMS as my mentor teacher, so I just learnt heaps from there. So I feel like a lot of my behavior management style comes from CMS, but it's definitely developed over the years as I've started doing PBS training as well. I'm on the PBS committee at my school, so I've done a lot of training for that. I've sort of integrated a lot of things. So what I'm going to take you through right now is kind of a merged version of a lot of different systems. Another one I talked about earlier was 1, 2, 3 Magic, which I had to use in my 1st year at the school I'm currently at. So it is a bit of a modge podge, but I'll try and tell you where different aspects have come from, so that if one of them kind of sounds like, oh, that's how my brain works, that sounds really interesting, you can go off and investigate that program and find out a little bit more about it. But basically all of these programs start off with your low-key strategies about keeping students on task and noticing when students are starting to get off task. And the first thing you should ask yourself about is why? Why are they getting off task? Has the lesson gone on for too long? Does the student not understand what is being asked of them? So try and deal with the trigger, the thing that's starting to get them off task first. But then as you start to see them doing these little things, then here are some strategies you can use for it. The first one, we know the teacher look. So looking at the student, giving them a bit of a scowl to say what you're doing is not right. Another one is proximity, so just walking around and being closer to those students that are not doing the right thing to try and prompt them to get back on task. Another one is gestures. So especially if you're on mat time and you don't want to interrupt the flow of the classroom, then maybe it's just and looking at the student that is doing that thing. You want to try and make these low-key responses low-key. So it means that it's not stopping the flow of the lesson, especially if you are giving out directions and you're talking to the students. You don't want to stop the whole class and go, Billy Box, please behave, you're not doing it. You don't want it to be this long thing. You just want it to be a quick thing that they can respond to and get back onto track. Sometimes though you might need to give a little bit more of a verbal, especially if they're not making eye contact with you, they're not responding to any of those other things, then you might say Billy, and it's just a simple name, it's just a simple quick thing. You might sometimes have to tell them what it is, like identify the behavior that they have done wrong. So like listening please Billy, active listening please Jill, just something like that that's quick, not too obtrusive to your lesson, but lets them know what you expect of them and bringing them back. Sometimes if there's a lot of kids that are starting to get off track, then it's a come on back for everybody. So don't be afraid to use wait time. I'm sure you've heard about wait time before. It's basically you don't start talking or trying to explain something to your students until everybody is listening. And so you can sit there and you can wait until you have every single person listening, and you can start pinging a few students if they're not listening, or even more effective than that can be reward the students who are. So thank you for listening, Billy. Oh, I love how Jenna's eyes are locked on me at the moment. I know that Billy is ready for the next thing we're going to learn about. So don't be hesitant to use praise and those good things to bring the students on back. One thing I have noticed about being a teacher for 10 years now and employing these strategies is it can get really tiring, and you feel like you're always switched on to 100%, and you've always got to be like this to keep everybody really on task and attentive. And what I've found is that if you give it the time and the energy in term 1, then you don't need to do it as much later on. So try really hard. I know it's tiring. I know you can kind of get sick of it and go, oh, do I still have to do all this? But just do it for term 1, stick it through, and you will reap the rewards for the rest of the year. So let's say that Billy belongs, and I keep using the name Billy, poor Billy. Let's say that Billy isn't listening. He didn't respond to that low key thing. Then that's where you really want to stop. You want to make eye contact. If in the CMS training they talk about squaring off, so making sure you are right looking at him at his level, and you're going to use a minimal amount of verbal and say, Billy, I need you to actively listen now. Thank you. And that's the other thing, always keep your manners. CMS talks about that all the time. Add your thank you in the end of it. It helps build respect, it helps keep rapport. If the student continues to do the misbehaviour, then you're going to give them an if-then choice. Billy, if you keep talking to the person next to you, then I'm going to have to move you over next to me. Keep it simple and keep the consequence that you are given lined up to what they are doing. So it wouldn't make sense to say to Billy, if you keep talking, then you're going to stay in at lunchtime. Those two don't marry up, they're not related, and it's also not timely. It really needs to happen like that if there's going to be a consequence. However, if he's sitting next to his friend and he's talking, then a logical consequence is to move him somewhere else. That makes sense, okay? So try and line them up as best as you can. And if this stuff is new to you, I definitely recommend having a sit down before any of this happens and think about what your logical consequences are. So go, okay, a common one is rocking on chairs. So maybe it's that they lose their chair and they have to stand up. Another one might be submitting work that's not up to standard or not finishing work on time. Just go through some of the common problems that could arise and what the logical consequence is for it. Because you're going to be able to stay a lot calmer in your lesson and deal with those behaviors if you're pre-prepared for them and you know what's going on in your head, not sitting there going, oh my god, that student's really annoying me, I don't know what to do, what's the consequence, oh, okay, you're going to get frustrated and it's not going to go as smoothly. Now, after that, they make their choice. They're either back on task, in which case praise them as quickly as you can. So, Billy, I love how you sat there for the last 2 minutes and didn't talk. Thank you, Billy, you're doing a great job of sitting still. Whatever it is, praise them as soon as you can to let them know that, one, they're back in your good books, not that they ever really left, but just in their head, they've managed to, to restore that connection between the two of you. And also it lets everybody else know that you've carried through on that expectation and there was something that happened there when they didn't do the right thing. If, however, Billy keeps talking, then you want to enact your consequence. So, Billy, you've made your choice. Please come over and move here. You want to try and keep that short and sharp. Again, you want to add a thank you to the end of it. Thank you for moving over here. You don't want to make too big of a deal of it. If, however, they don't move or they move and they continue to misbehave, that's where you're going to bump it up again. And you may have to resort to whatever your whole school behaviour management policy is. So maybe it's that the student is then put in timeout. Maybe it's that they're withdrawn from the classroom and they go outside. Maybe you have buddy classes, or maybe from then it's referred to the office. It's a great idea to check with your school to know what their system is. Mine is I send them outside if they're an older child, because inside I feel like if you put them in timeout, there's a big shame to that because everybody can see them and they're like, oh, everybody can see me, and it's really hard to come back from that. So older kids, I will send them outside and say, look, just go take a couple minutes outside and I'll come and speak to you in a minute. If they're younger kids, then maybe it's a timeout chair and you sit them on there for a couple of minutes. You don't want to leave them on there for too long. I think there was a thing floating around that no longer than their age. So if you're a year 1 teacher and they're 6 years old, you're not leaving them in timeout for more than 6 minutes. Then before you bring them back into the classroom, you want to have a one-on-one conversation with them. Depending on what the misbehaviour was, you might want to do some sort of restorative justice, which is talking about with them, like having them identify what did you do wrong, how could you have done it differently, what will you do better next time, those sorts of questions. Some schools will have a written version of them, especially for little kids. You might have smiley faces and frowny faces and things that they can colour in to show how they're feeling, how they should react, that sort of thing. But you don't want to just bring them back in without some sort of talk there. You also, during all of this, you want to allow them to save face. So if they've done something wrong, you want that time where you reset everybody and you make them feel like they're part of the class again and that everything's forgiven and that everything can just settle back down and you're not thinking about that anymore. Through all of your interactions when students are misbehaving, always breathe. Okay, it's very important to stay calm and just deep breaths. If you have a student in your class who is difficult to manage, if they are known or unknown to the admin, always seek admin help. Sometimes you might need to bring in a individual behaviour plan where you actually look at what their triggers are, what's setting them off to those behaviours, and how you can help that student learn to be better behaved. That's something I learned about on my PBS training, which is that when a student can't spell, we teach them how to spell. When a student can't write, we teach them how to write. When a student can't behave, the logical thing there is that we teach them how to behave as opposed to just always telling them off. In this day and age with iPads and computer games, we can't expect kids to come in and just sit there at their desk beautifully. For some of them, that's a very unnatural thing to do, and we actually have to teach them how to do it, which is one of the main reasons that I am for using extrinsic motivation and rewards in my classroom, because for some kids who are making that transition, coming into the school, trying to learn how to sit and be a good student, that really works for them and they respond really well to tangible rewards. If a student is really tough to manage with their behaviour, another thing you might want to look at is an escalation profile. So these are for the students who get really angry and out of control and they can't control their emotions, and it just basically identifies when they're starting to get up there and how you can bring them down at each level. So if they're at the top level, how do you get them to calm down from that? If they're starting to get triggered, how do you bring them down for that? I'm not going to go into those things more in detail to here today because they're so specific to the student, to the school, and it's really something you should bring your admin into and discuss it with them if you're having issues. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is your little triggers, your little nitpicky things, the things that bug you rotten. All teachers are going to have them, and when students do those things, they're going to flip a switch in you where you're going to want to snap back at them or just not respond as well as you could to something else. So for example, if a student is talking to another student while I can deal with that pretty easy. That doesn't bug me. However, whistling in my classroom, or I can't stand whistling, and if I hear a student whistle, my usual response is, who's doing that? Okay? But you've got to try and identify what it is so that when it does happen, you know how you're going to deal with it and you can try and take 3 breaths and calm down. I hate students who try and talk back at me. So if I'm trying to discuss something and they're just always quipping back with things, that's another one that bugged me. I didn't really experience that until I moved into upper school, so it's definitely been a bit of a trial and error thing to try and learn how to deal with those things. Little kids often, I feel like, are a little bit easier to manage with their behaviour, but that might just be because that's where I spent the majority of my years and I'm just not as familiar with upper school. I mentioned before about 1, 2, 3 magic, and basically what that is you have a 1, a 2 and a 3 up on your board, and if a student does something wrong, you say that's a 1, and they're meant to go over to that board and move their name to the 1, and then they go back and sit down. And if they do something again, you say that's a 2, and they go up and they move their name to a 2. And if they get to the bottom of the 2, then that's when they're going outside for timeout. The cons about that system is it's visual. I am not a supporter of a visual behaviour management system that has negative connotations to it. So I don't like the act of a student moving their name to something negative. I think there's a lot of shame in that. I think it's harder for the student to come back from it, and it's also a lot of upkeep to try and move the students' names around all the time. The thing that I did pick up from 1, 2, 3 Magic though that I liked was that after recess and after lunch, the student gets reset. So that means it doesn't matter what they do before recess, they come back in after recess and they've got a fresh chance. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. If you're a bit of a pessimist, you're saying, oh, well, they'll come back in and they'll still be just as naughty as they were before recess. Maybe, but then they're going to go through the numbers a lot quicker and they're going to get up to the number 3 when they refer to the admin. However, most kids are going to respond to the fresh start and they're going to come back in and they're going to be better behaved for you, especially if you've got a student who's misbehaving, because let's say you do English first and they don't like English, or they don't like writing in the morning and you're doing a writing lesson first up and that gets them off. Well, coming back in after recess, maybe you're doing a different activity. Maybe it's HAS, or maybe it's maths. That's maybe one of their favorite subjects, or like a less hated subject. Well, in that case, you want them to have a fresh start because you want them to do as good as you can. So that's definitely something that I picked up from 1, 2, 3 Magic that I've carried into my teaching. Every break, fresh start, start again. Again, you might want to, as they're coming through the door, try and say something to them that helps them get off on the right foot. So, oh, I hope you had a lovely recess, Billy. I can't wait to work with you in maths today. Or I'm watching you, Billy, in maths today, and I'm going to see if I can give out some group points to you. Just something like that that lets them, not like, I'm watching you, you better behave, but just a, like, we're back, we're connected again, we've got a good relationship, let's continue on with good behaviour, let's make right choices. So I've talked to you a little bit about CMS training. I've talked to you a little bit about 1, 2, 3 Magic. The other one that I've mentioned is PBS or PBIS. It started in America and it's kind of come over here in the last, 10 years, and it's becoming more known around Australia, and I think a lot more schools and departments are starting to pick up on it and running with it. It's basically a framework or an approach to behaviour management and setting one up within your school. So it's not a scripted, like this is the poster you're going to have up on your wall and your students are going to move like this. It's more about getting your staff together and developing an approach that works for your school, your clientele. And PBS will look different in each school that you are in. So it's not really something that I can sit down here and say, this is step 1, this is step 2 of it. And it's not really something that you can adopt in your classroom if your whole school isn't doing it, but you can definitely take aspects of it. So like I said, the clear expectations, developing a matrix that says exactly what you want students to be displaying. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about today that I learned from PBS that I love the way they've set it up is that they believe that when students misbehave, it's in order to get something or avoid something. So it might be trying to get your attention, it might be trying to get other students' attentions, it might be trying to get to like a specific thing, like get to iPad time or get to go home. The avoid one might be avoiding you if you don't have a good relationship with that student, which unfortunately does happen. Even if you're a great person, a great teacher, you may not mesh with every single student. It could be to avoid working with another student in your class. It could be avoiding writing or avoiding working. And what you want to do is any student that's misbehaving on a regular basis is you want to try and analyze their behavior and work out why they are doing it. What are they trying to get, or what are they trying to avoid, and put in step places to help that student succeed. So if that student hates writing, depending on their age level, if they're younger kids, maybe it's about making writing more fun. So I know a student that I worked with on my ATP was very, very reluctant to write, didn't want to put pen to paper ever. And so I developed a table. It was just a simple table that had a goal written on it for how much we would like him to write. In the early days that was set together. So we're like, how many words do you think we can write today? Do you think we can write 5? Let's write down 5. And then we set a reward. So maybe it was, if you write 5 words, you get 5 minutes on the iPad. And then he would work hard. We'd look at how many words he wrote at the end, and then he would get that reward. The catch was that if he achieved that reward, the next time that we used that chart, he had to aim for a higher goal. And he went from writing nothing to writing over like half a page. He was a grade 3, half a page of writing, and he began to love writing just because we had a fun process attached to it. Whereas I would say in his previous school, with his previous teacher, there was something that had happened there where maybe he was being put down for his writing because it wasn't good enough, or maybe other students were laughing at him. Something had happened there that had stopped him from writing. So if you look at why they're misbehaving and try and look at it from a viewpoint of how can I help this child succeed in my class, you're going to stop all of those misbehaviors in their tracks. Because this series is all about getting you ready for back to school, I just want to go back to your first week for a second and just talk about behavior management really quickly. I've already said on your first day as one of your first activities, so maybe do a quick little get to know you activity, but then jump straight into setting your rules and your expectations. Try and do it as a whole class. Try and get them as actively involved as you can. Maybe try out some cooperative learning strategies, especially if you're in the older grades. So maybe split them up into groups where they start brainstorming and then bring it back as a whole class so they feel even more involved. But once you've done that, you want to start pinging students straight away for good behavior as much as you can. PBS talks about a 4-to-1 ratio, so 4 good things, 4 praises, 4 rewards to every 1 negative comment or picking up a behavior that you do. Obviously an even higher rate than that would be great, but aim for 4-to-1 to start off with. So definitely ping people for lots of good things. So thank you for doing this, thank you for doing that, I love how you're doing that, I love how you're doing this. But do correct students when they do things wrong. It can be really hard and daunting to try and tell a student off on the first day, but if you are consistent from day one, then there's no surprises. They know exactly what they need to do and it's going to be easier to train them than it is to let them do a misbehavior and then try and correct it later on. So do ping them, do go through your behavior management policy, like what does happen when they misbehave. Go through that with them as well on the first day, and if you have to ping students, be brave and do it, because again, you will reap the benefits in the long run. Then on day 2, you want to go through it again. Get your rules up. So maybe on the first day you brainstormed with them and then you take them home that night and you do up a good copy of them, and then day 2 you bring them back and you show the students that, and you go through all of those rules again and remind the students of them, and again ping as much as you can. Then on day 3 you want to go through those rules again, and on day 4 and on day 5. You want to do it for the whole first week of school every morning. You might try and add a little bit of fun to it by saying like, okay, for this morning what I want you guys to do is fill in the missing words of our rules. So hide the rules, write some of it up on the board, take a few words away and they have to fill in the blanks. Or say, how many of our rules do you remember? Quick, write them down, see how many you can get. But always be refreshing those rules. And then the second week, when you go back on the Monday, refresh them again. You don't need to do it every day after that, but at the beginning of the week, every week for the first like 4 or 5 weeks, you want to be restating your expectations. And if you're noticing a lot of students are slipping up on one particular one, or a lot of students are doing a misbehavior that's not really addressed in your rules, then modify your rules. Don't be afraid to bring in a new one. So let's say you didn't have a rule about rocking on your chairs, but you see that every student in your class keeps rocking on their chair and it's something you're pinging for all the time. Bring in an extra rule and say all 4 chair legs must be on the floor at all time. That way you're being very, very clear with your expectations and you're modeling it with your students and you're developing it and adapting it as you go on. The more consistent you can be right from the start, the smoother the year is going to be. Another example for me is with my reading group. So I do literacy rotations where I have a group with me and all the other kids are off doing different things. They have different groups on different activities, but they don't work as a group. And during that first week, my concentration isn't with the group that I'm on. It's actually on all the other groups, and it's noting down students who are doing the right thing and it's pinging those who are not straight away. Johnny, remember during reading group time we're working. And Lara, I don't think you can sit next to Rebecca if you keep talking. So it's looking at all those other things around you and not giving as much attention to your group, because once you've done that and you've done that hard hog, the next few weeks are just going to get easier and easier to the point where you're going to be absorbed with this group and you won't even have to watch these guys very much anymore, because they're going to be so well trained about what they can and cannot do. And they're going to feel like in the back of your head that you're watching them because you ping them so much in the first week. So be as consistent as you can. And I don't say this lightly, because that was not me in my first couple of years teaching. I actually gave up on doing reading groups. I had one where all these groups were reading at the same time. There was a big noise level. It didn't work because I didn't put in the time to control all those other groups and set the expectations clear enough for what they needed to do. I tried to focus too much in my group, and then I got angry at Johnny over there because he was always being so loud. So try as much as you can to be consistent, and do a reflection at the end of every day about how you're doing with your behaviour management approach and whether it's working or not, and be flexible. Ask your mentor teacher for help if you are struggling. If the behaviour management just isn't going right, maybe what you need is another person to come in and observe how you're doing and where maybe you're going wrong. The thing that I hate about having other people come and observe you though is you often change what you do, right? You're more on top of things, you use more energy, and they don't see you as you would usually be, but it can still be really, really helpful to have another set of eyes come in, because maybe they see things that you don't, especially when you're doing group work. Maybe they notice that actually it's Stephanie over there that's always getting Johnny off task. It's not Johnny's fault, it's actually Stephanie that you needed to be dealing with the whole time. So I hope this video was useful for you guys. I have trouble with some of these videos knowing where to base the video out. Like, am I being basic enough? Am I assuming that you guys know too much? I don't know. Let me know below if you found this video helpful, or if there's anything that you would like more detail or more depth on, or if you think maybe if I ever do this video series again, maybe I could go a little bit higher for some of the things, or not in depth as much. I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye!